Hello and welcome back, everybody. We have a new book to talk about. Now, this book, this next series is going to be about Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. I'm doing this kind of for the same reason I did Frankenstein and Kindred, because they are books that I am teaching, which means that I know them reasonably well, which means they're pretty good books to start this whole channel with while I figure out what I'm doing with it and what these multi-part book series are going to be. But right now, I thought I would. I've just finished kind of rereading it because my class is about 2 chapters behind where I am, which is what a teacher's schedule should be, I think. And I thought I would talk about it and see what it is about this book that I enjoy teaching. Why do I like it? I mean, that's always the big question. And what I think it can deliver to us as readers, especially here in the 21st century, almost 100 years after the book was published. So. Yeah, A Room of One's Own. If you are not familiar with it, it is Virginia Woolf. It is basically a merging of a couple of speeches that she gave at these women's colleges. She was called and asked to talk about women and fiction. And she gave these speeches and then collected them into this book called A Room of One's Own. And the basic thesis of the book is that if a woman is going to write, she needs to have 2 things. She needs to have a regular income, which Woolf pegged at about £500 a year. And I think doing all the weird conversions over the last 100 years, that comes out to something like, like $80,000 a year, maybe, US, give or take. So not an unreasonable income for a single person. But £500 a year and a room of her own, a place where she can work undisturbed with a lock on the door and everything. And then the question became, well, okay, great, that sounds wonderful. Why don't women have that? And she went into this long, discursive exploration into the history of women as writers, women as just people, and why it's taken so long for women to get to the point where they could have £500 a year and a room of their own. So it's really good. For one thing, I will say that Woolf's writing is lovely. I really, really like reading her writing. It's, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of stream of consciousness. There's a whole kind of recurring gimmick in the book where she kind of follows a thought, which goes to another thought, which goes to another thought, and then she gets interrupted by someone, a waiter or a librarian or a beadle or somebody. And it is really, really lovely. She's a very pleasant writer to read, which I kind of like. But the other thing is that 100 years on, she's kind of noticing points about women in society, women in relation to men, that are really still true today. You read these points and then you look at the news and you think, oh boy, Virginia Woolf would be mad if she could see this. If she were alive, which of course she is not. But that's not the point. So she talks about several things. The big thing, of course, is this sort of feminist perspective on writing and literature. She explores how women have been represented in fiction, both as characters and as writers, and how women have become creative writers, and why it's so hard, the further back you go, to find women writing about themselves and writing about sort of their issues and how they react to how the greater bulk of the literary tradition is written by men, and how do women then fit their own voice into that? Is there a female voice of literature and things of that nature? And then she kind of takes that into a discussion about how men and women relate just in general, not just as writers of fiction. How men have looked at women for so long as kind of she calls it an enlarging mirror, right? That men will look at women so that they can see themselves as much larger and more powerful than they really might be. And that has led men to go on and do all the things that men do. And then what happens, of course, when women stop doing that, when women say, I don't want to be your mirror, I don't want to enlarge you, I want to be myself and participate in all of this, men tend to get really, really annoyed about that sort of thing for some strange reason. And so I think it's the largest part of this book is about that. It is a very feminist book. It is very much a little bit maybe past first wave feminism. First wave feminism was largely about gaining the vote. It was largely about legalities, right? Being able to vote, being able to have property, being able to control your money, things of that nature. And I think Woolf was starting to kind of push past, saying, all right, now that we have the vote, which she did in 1928 when she wrote this, now that we have the vote, what's next? What do we have to work on next? And so she was trying to look into that and trying to figure that out. It then kind of turns a little bit into economic inequality. That pops up a lot because, of course, women have, for a very, very long, always time, women have been less economically free than men in general. And of course, there's going to be the woman here and there who isn't. But by and large, yeah, women have had a harder time with economic freedom. When I was presenting this book to my students, I gave them a little sort of background or history lesson. And I mentioned to them that women in the U.S., anyway, I know Virginia Woolf is English, but women in the U.S. could not open a bank account in some banks without their husband's signature up until about 1974. Couldn't get their own credit cards, things like that. So even within my lifetime, women have had a hard time necessarily having economic independence. And Woolf explores that idea of how important economic independence is to the creative mind, right? Can you be a poet? Can you be a writer? Can you be somebody who makes great art if you can't feed yourself, if you don't have a job that gives you the time and the leisure and the mental calm to create the art that you want to create? And what is that level where you need, what is that level of income and that you need to have in order to make art? And why has it been so hard for women to do that? And of course, I want to talk about her writing style. I think her writing style is definitely worth a look at. It's very, like I said, very discursive. And one of the things that she does is she kind of fictionalizes her search for meaning. When she starts this speech that she's given, she basically tells the audience, she says, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to take my research and my search and my thinking, and I'm going to compress it into a 2-day period in which I will be this imaginary Mary Seton. And so she tells us right out that the story she's about to tell us is not technically true, but there is a lot of truth in fiction. And so I'm really interested in exploring that idea of what is the relationship between truth and fiction, and maybe why Woolf decided to do that rather than give a fairly straightforward exploration of her own research and her own thoughts. Why compress it into this story of a fictional woman trying to find out the answer to this question of women in fiction? I want to talk a little bit about her use of metaphor and symbolism, because she does a lot of stuff with metaphor, which is really good. The whole thing kind of feels very conversational in a lot of places. And of course, just the use of things like the room as a symbol. There's some recurring symbols, recurring motifs and ideas that pop up throughout the book I think are really important and I think are worth talking about. The overall relationship to the current world, I mentioned before that if Woolf could see how we are now, she would probably be pretty upset. I mean, don't get me wrong, we have made advances since 1928. The women of 2024 have rights and freedoms that the women of 1928 did not have and couldn't have. We have made a lot of advances, but there are still some fundamental issues that are, when you read the book, you recognize them, you see them. You've seen women online or in your own life expressing these issues and complaining about these issues today. And you would think that we would have figured this out in the last 100 years, but it's hard. I mean, things like the ongoing battle of abortion in the U.S., Roe versus Wade, the idea of a wage gap, and why don't women and men in the same profession always make the same salary? There is a weird kind of, if you're online as much as I am, and I am online probably more than I should be, you may have noticed there is a very strange, weird kind of semi-culty appearance of women who call themselves tradwives, who seem to be advocating a return to tradition, and by tradition it means basically being a servant to your husband. And it is very strange. It's very, very strange, because they have mythologized this idea of being the wife and mother into some very romantic, unrealistic thing where they exist to serve their husband. And the Instagram and TikTok posts they put up are never quite as messy, hectic, and depressing as it probably would have been in real life. I want to talk a little bit about how the ideas that Woolf is putting up kind of is reflected in our current literature and TV, how it connects to third wave feminism, where we talk about bodily autonomy, physical safety, where we get to fourth wave feminism. Talk about the intersectionality, or rather the lack of it, that Virginia Woolf has. Virginia Woolf's thesis is great, but there are some critiques to be made about what she's leaving out that she doesn't discuss. Maybe because it just doesn't occur to her. I don't know. And yeah, what is the role of men in the advance of women? What role do we have to play in women gaining their sort of full autonomy and their ability to live the full lives that they really should live, the way that men have been able to for so very long? So there is a lot to talk about in this book. It's very, very dense. It's a really dense, I mean, not just idea dense, but, page dense. But there's a lot to talk about. I'm sure there are people who have made their academic careers out of studying Virginia Woolf. I am not one of those people. As I have said before, I'm a guy who likes books and likes to talk about them. And so I fully expect that I will probably miss stuff, maybe even mess stuff up, and that is fine. If you are a Woolf scholar, if you would like to maybe very gently and kindly, because this is the internet, and we know how the internet is. The internet is gentle and kind, especially YouTube. YouTube is gentle and kind. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you think I need to know about Virginia Woolf and her works. So that is what we're up to. We're talking Virginia Woolf. We're talking Rooms of One Own. We're talking Oxbridge and Furnham College. We're talking 500 pounds a year for life. Isn't that great? Thank you, Aunt Mary, falling off a horse. So I really hope that you will stick with me. I hope that you will join us on this little journey through the mind of Virginia Woolf, a.k.a. Mary Seton or Mary Beaton or Mary Carmichael, or whichever Mary she chooses to be at any given time. All right, and I will see you next time.